scammers and people that are doing fraudulent or adding multiple carrier registrations. When you can't register, that's a benefit.
Can't claim somebody else's DOT number if you can't get on the site, right?
I see all the complaints on FreightX, a lot of frustration out there for folks that want to get access to it. Like, as someone that cares about the health of the freight market, I say, look, it's okay. It's okay that you can't register.
Talk
We don't
about
need more
increasing barriers to entry. That's one way to do it, yeah.
I've argued that the FMCSA should limit it. They're apparently doing it indirectly. Feature, not a bug. I want to talk a little bit about freight rates, because this is a conversation that's been popping up. We've had a real strong freight market. But one of the interesting thing is one of our friends on FreightX has posted that really capacity's loosened on Friday and through the weekend. Questions about what does this mean? I don't think it means very much. This happens every single June. Is that second week we see a dip in freight volume. If we can pull that up, that's right there. You can see that the freight rates do go down every single June, sort of that second week. And then we end with the last week of June is real strong, and you can see that that happens every single year. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone.
No, end of month, end of quarter, it'll tighten back up.
Yeah, so it's a really great time here in freight. Julie, I'm super excited about what's happening in the market.
Me too. And I think just to your earlier point, this small dip is not in any way systematic or something that's going to linger. I think, we had a surge around Memorial Day.
I don't even know it's a dip, it's a pause.
A pause.
We're going to catch our breath.
Okay, not a dip. And yes, we'll see what happens in July, but I absolutely think the rest of June is going to be incredibly strong. And as we get to end of month, end of quarter, it's going to continue to tighten. And I think rates will continue to go up. And I think that we'll see potentially record, well, not record, but we'll get back into those. Do you think we'll see tender rejections at 20%?
Yeah, for sure. By the end of the year. I mean, it's going to happen. There's no new capacity. Maybe. I mean, we're at right south of 18%. It's possible. I could see it going into July 4th weekend. Yeah. Certainly that week before, we always see a surge in tender rejections. We see a surge in spot rates. So it definitely happens. One of the things I'm excited about as it relates to FreightWaves Today is actually going on site. We're going to be at Samsara's live event in Las Vegas. We're going to broadcast live, so we're going to be there. We've got a couple of these opportunities. Not only we're doing in-studio interviews, but Julie, you and I are headed to Vegas to do live on site with Samsara.
I know, it's going to be great.
Speaking of Samsara, you have some thoughts about Samsara?
We do. We are going to take a quick break and talk about Samsara, and we're going to do our sonar update and hear from quite a few of our different sponsors. But I think next up we have our sonar update.
Samsara, of course, is the AI-powered safety platform Fleet, which again identifies risk in real time, giving managers greater visibility into what's happening on the road and providing the coaching insights needed to improve driver performance. In fact, fleets use Samsara completely for AI safety solutions and have reduced crash rates by nearly 75%. To learn more and see the data behind these results, download the latest Samsara safety report at samsara.com/freightwaves.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesse Love are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara Driving Coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, Masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with me, and we're going to go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're going to help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't want to miss out on Masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, and then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited, and I hope to see you in class.
Imagine a world where your freight moves as fast as a digital pulse. What if your visibility didn't just tell you where a truck was, but exactly where it needed to be 48 hours from now? Think of a logistics network that corrects its own mistakes before they cost you a single dime. What if your supply chain could think for itself? Imagine AI agents negotiating rates in milliseconds, predictive models that solve labor shortages before they even happen. This isn't science fiction, it's the agenda. On July 15th at the historic Old Post Office in Chicago, FreightWaves presents the Supply Chain AI Symposium. We are defining in real time how AI is embedded into every mile, every warehouse, and every handshake. Because in 2026, the future isn't just coming, it's already negotiating. The FreightWaves Supply Chain AI Symposium. Secure your spot now.
I'm super pumped about the AI Symposium. You can get your tickets today. It's in Chicago. We're going to dive into AI conversations. You know, there's going to be a lot of just clarification on what AI means in our industry. Not only is the freight industry benefiting from AI, we did this SITREP report, which is a research report on Sonar for Sonar subscribers, just about how impactful the AI construction is to freight, as much as 30,000, crazy stat, 30,000 truckloads go into a 500 megawatt AI data center, something that is absolutely insane when you think about how much freight that's moving.
It is insane, and it speaks so well to what's happening in the flatbed market and why we've seen this huge surge. And we expect it to later happen as they do the fit out versus the building of these with truckload. But absolutely staggering what's happening in the flatbed market, and absolutely related to that.
And we're going to hear a lot about that at the AI Summit, not only about the impact of freight demand, but more importantly about how companies can use AI in their business, how logistics companies, we've got a number of the vendors and providers. And if you are out looking for AI solutions and trying to figure out what is right for you, what makes sense for you, what are use cases, the AI Summit is the place to do that. That's in July in Chicago. Couldn't be a better place. By the way, I know you're from Wisconsin. You spent a lot of time in Chicago. I don't think there's a better city in the United States than Chicago in the month of July. It's absolutely gorgeous there, and it's a great city to go to.
I would say it's my favorite city in the U.S. always. But yes, as we talk about...
It's the second best freight city, Chattanooga being number one. Speaking of the market, let's get in to see what is happening in Sonar.
Week, it's mid-June, and we are certainly seeing a strong freight market. There's no doubt that this market is incredibly strong. It's not been this strong for many years, and because it's not driven by government stimulus, it actually does suggest that this rally will continue for some time. Consumer freight stayed really strong even during the depths of the freight recession. This is really related to retail. We didn't see, except in 2022, really a slowdown in retail consumer freight. The industrials absolutely collapsed over the last couple of years, but that's come back really starting November of last year and followed through to this year. So industrials are really driving this freight recovery, which I think is really important. We see it in the rail data. We see it in the truckload data that's sensitive to industrials like flatbed. And it does tell us that the freight market has a lot of legs to it. Certainly capacity is a component of all of this, but capacity is not the only part of the story. We're seeing it in the industrial segment as demonstrated by the ISM data, which is the Institute of Supply Management. It's their survey. We did see a real substantial increase or beat versus expectations. The LMI is telling us the same thing, that upstream data, upstream supply chains, upstream logistics demand and inventory build is happening, which is really pointing to the manufacturing sector and the industrial sector. We are seeing much stronger activity. We compare year over year, spot rates are up over 20% versus last year. Contract rates are up 11% versus last year. And expectations are that contract rates could double their increase basically by another double digit, which would be a pretty substantial increase on a 2-year basis. But to put that in perspective, that still, even if we get another 10% from here, we're still not back to where we were at the peak of COVID. So we have some room to go. There's no reason to suggest that this rally won't continue. Think about it. In order to get really capacity back into the market, you got to add truck drivers. There's so many things that are really restricting truck driver growth. Regulatory and compliance crackdowns, both at the federal and state level, restrictions on CDL issuance, immigration policy that's entirely restrictive, both for truck drivers, but just overall, that's cutting off an enormous amount of new entrants into the industry. More restrictions on whom can become a truck driver. And you could even point to Modus having a slowing or a mitigation effect. This is the computer system by the FMCSA. Whether you like it or not, when you have computer problems, it does slow the registration process down, which is really a positive, frankly, for keeping capacity out of the market. And then there's the question about what do large fleets do in terms of expanding the capacity. We've asked this question to a number of folks on FreightWaves Today. We asked Mark Scudder, who sits on the board of a lot of public trucking companies, also is involved in a lot of the transactions that happen across the space. And we asked Aaron Graft, and what we've heard is fleets are thinking about expansion, but as Mark Scudder says, they're all concerned about getting their balance sheets repaired and their income statements to a place where they expect them to be or need them to be, and therefore they're not going to be expanding their fleets aggressively like perhaps they would in past cycles. I think it's a positive sign because it means everybody's really in a cautious environment. In fact, you know, I get a lot of messages posted on social media or messages that are inbound, and no one's really accepting the fact that demand is stronger than it is. And what I keep saying is this recovery is not just a capacity shortage or a capacity crackdown, but it's also related to demand. And there's a lot of disbelief out there, and that's okay. Frankly, disbelief is good. It means that no one's going to get too aggressive. If they thought things were absolutely awesome, then they would be expanding their fleets. And so we kind of want fleet executives to be a little bit more cautious in this part of the cycle because it keeps us from overcorrecting. The more cautious that fleet executives are, the less likely they are to add trucks quickly, even if they could get drivers. So in order to get drivers and expand their fleets, they're going to have to pay more. We saw a report where Nussbaum is actually increasing driver pay. Other fleets are also doing the same. And I suspect that will be really the name of the game. And if construction comes back, which it could, you know, we could see some incentives by the federal government to really drive housing back into the market. If we do see expansion in housing, those construction jobs, the jobs of building houses, will take away from truck driving jobs, which again is just another element of capacity restriction. And we want restricted capacity. Restricted capacity is what gives trucking companies pricing power. It's what provides the strength. So we're looking for signs where the driver availability loosens, but when you have a tight job market like we got in the last week's jobs reports, it's going to demonstrate just how hard and challenging it is to find truck drivers. And that's a good thing. It means that truck drivers that are out there will get higher pay, but it also means that we're less likely to overexpand our capacity to a point where we end up in another significant downturn.
All right, Craig, lots of good stuff for us to talk about in that, but I wanted to call it, I love the way you explained, and as much as we've talked about industrials sort of being in this renaissance and driving the market, I hadn't really thought about the way you explained it in this update, where even through COVID and then through the recession, retail and consumer spending stayed relatively strong, and it was the industrials that collapsed. And now that they're back, we're seeing such a huge rise in, the need for capacity as well as now finally some volumes. And I just hadn't thought about it that way, that retail and consumer, we've been talking about, we think retail and consumer is back, has probably been relatively steady.
Been.
And then it's just that's actually driving it.
We had some slowdown in 2022. In fact, Joe Weisenthal at Bloomberg called it the FreightWaves recession because at the end of March, we were on the idea that the freight market was collapsing. This was the front end of the Great Freight Recession. We were seeing in the data a significant sharp decrease in freight volumes. And I think that was really a couple weeks later, 6 weeks later, we saw that Target, Amazon, Walmart all came out and said, wait, we have too much inventory. That was really a recession that the National Bureau of Economists reclassified as a not recession. In fairness, they were arguing, hey, it was so overheated due to all of the stimulus that we're not going to call it a recession because we're sort of back, sort of a regression to the mean. But what I do think is interesting is if you go back in 23 and 24, even in 25, where things were kind of abysmal in freight, the consumer kept on consuming, and we saw persistent volumes across that whole cycle, whereas industrials collapsed, and they really collapsed since 2022. And now the ISM data that we're seeing is, at the highest report it's been since May of 2022, which is really a sign of just how strong the overall economy, particularly industrials, are coming back. And so it's a really interesting time in the industrial segment. As we've heard on FreightWaves Today, as we have these CEO guests, we always are asking them what they're thinking about the market. And speaking of CEO guests, we now have our next guest, Amrita Bhasin, the co-founder and CEO of Sotira. How are you doing, Amrita?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
We're glad to have you. You guys provide a lot of the liquidation. Speaking of over inventory, reverse logistics, what does the demand look like right now for your services?
It's a really good question. Many of the categories we work with are CPG, so food and beverage, health and wellness, beauty, cosmetics, these kinds of consumable items that have expiration dates. I would say that during times of economic uncertainty, like the last 2 or 3 years, demand has been really strong. On the other end, there are certain categories of items that our platform is seeing increased pretty much product for, so increased supply. We see plus-sized items are a good example of this, largely fueled by GLP-1 usage across the US, retailers and brands, e-commerce and D2C companies pulling their plus-sized lines. And those kinds of products are a little bit more difficult because the demand isn't necessarily there. So we largely focus on CPG items, but we have visibility into excess inventory and overstock pretty much across categories, even categories that we don't touch. So it's a very interesting time right now.
Amrita, I am a proud user of GLP-1. The most frustrating part about that is I've reduced my food budget, but I have not reduced my clothing budget. I am down something like 4 sizes, and every time I go and I buy nice jackets and sort of fitted clothes, every time I go spend money, I feel like it's already out of date. I had some that were given to me over the holidays. They're now too big, and I told my wife I've got to do it. So I imagine that you talked about plus sizes. That is really bullish for clothers, but also requires liquidation. What do we do with all these big clothes? I mean, the good news about American society is there's always bigger and bigger sizes. So as you're making your way down the ladder, you do benefit from people. I've given away a lot of my clothes to family members that are still in the early start of their journey. And so it's funny because I'm sort of a size ahead of them.
Yeah, we've historically seen strong demand for categories like lifestyle, a lot of women's clothing that we work with, more up the ladder, more prestige and premium categories versus explicit fast fashion. I think the plus size category is really hard right now because there's a lot of discussion as to how do we also enable sustainability within this liquidation space. We are based in California, and California has strong Senate bill legislation that is directly impacting a lot of the logistics companies and a lot of the producers. So it's called EPR, Extended Producer's Responsibility. And there's this discussion about, as we continue to produce more and more clothing and Americans are moving through clothing sizes and ranges faster, like your experience, what do we do with all of this excess? Can we create new outlets for it? Is there an export market for it? So that's something that the industry is really talking about right now because the level of excess for certain categories, like even junk food, it's largely unprecedented. We have not seen this volume of excess where this clothing is not not used, it's not returned, it's brand new product. It's brand new junk food items, chips, snacks, cereals, all these items that historically have had a lot of sugar in them and have been high calorie, and they're not expired, they're not short dated. It's pure overstock that's being liquidated because of lack of American consumer demand in the grocery stores.
Can you talk a little bit more about how your organization helps companies, think through brand protection versus liquidation and finding outlets for those products that, to your point, maybe are brand new clothes or are returned clothes based on GLP-1s, or you spoke about like luxury products as well too. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so our sweet spot is typically prestige and premium products. So less so luxury and less so fast fashion or lower market. It's prestige and premium across all the categories of inventory that we do. We supply many of the regional off-price stores across the US. Many of the brands and retailers that we work with do not want to sell in national off-price stores. They want to find the most discreet solution possible for where their inventory can go and also capture recovery on their products, whether it is clothing or accessories or food and beverage. They want some level of recovery typically. And so regional off-price stores, we supply a lot of bin stores, a lot of private auctions we work with because those are very discreet. They don't show up in Google searches. It's very much a solution where you can basically sell your products to consumers that are different from your existing consumers. So if you are a premium beverage company and your consumers shop at Kroger, the places where we are placing your overstock products are not going to be the same consumer who shops at Kroger. And that's kind of how we largely protect against brand dilution and any sort of disruption to your forward sales, which is our top priority, is being able to liquidate in a way that protects your brand.
That makes a lot of sense. And you also spoke that some of your customers don't want their product maybe resold in the US, and it means maybe exporting. And I imagine some is imported. Can you talk about how tariffs have impacted the supply chain for you specifically?
So we've seen overstock due to tariffs for a few reasons. There's been a lot of shipping delays at various points within the supply chain. Sometimes it's like product is literally sitting at the port in Long Beach or in somewhere in continental United States, and the brand does not have anywhere to route it to. They can't route it to their warehouse. They can't route it to a retail store. And at that point, we would pretty much take over, and that would get routed to one of the outlets that we are able to identify as relevant and a good fit for that specific product. We've also seen a lot of excess of ingredients and packaging and pretty much materials. And this is an interesting kind of middle ground where, how can those materials be repurposed or be used for something valuable? Oftentimes there is working capital tied up in that product, the same way there's working capital tied up in finished product as well. So I would say the tariffs have created, they've created stockouts for many of our customers, but when they create overstock, that is an opportunity for our company to kind of come in and say, it's probably not worth you holding this and continuing to pay port fees, or if it's in your warehouse, continuing to pay storage fees. Obviously, port fees can be pretty high, and that cost benefit analysis at that point is just not worth it.
Amrita, the GLP-1 story, I think what's going on around healthcare is probably the most transformative thing in modern society. Maybe, at least this is my friends on X sort of believe this, that what we're seeing around GLP-1s and the medical revolution could be as impactful, if not more impactful than AI. That's just in terms of human health. But I've noticed that a lot of companies, we're hearing that their same-store sales are down in certain food categories. You mentioned it. There's this sort of inventory overstock situation. How are companies, particularly retailers, thinking about inventory going forward? Are they just taking less of these high sugar, high carb products and trying to really lean into protein? How are they thinking about, consumers consuming fewer calories?
It's a good question because I think it's important to note that we don't just have GLP-1, we have a lot of new changes at the food manufacturing level around red dyes and things like Red 40. So now basically manufacturers and brands have to look at that legislation and those regulations and be like, how do we reformulate our whole R&D process? So what this means for our industry, for the liquidation in the secondary market, is that we have overstock not just due to GLP-1 and changing demand, but also due to flavors and ingredients being being phased out. And this is not just like a 1 month process. This R&D process can literally take the next 2 to 3 years. So we expect to see consistent supply of overstock food and beverage, particularly junk food, a lot of energy drinks, sugary cereals, sugary snacks, caffeinated beverages, kind of everything within that category onto our market. At the same time, we saw that chocolate prices were really crazy the last year, right? Due to shortages and due to increases in prices of cocoa. So there's a lot of different factors affecting this right now. And I think for brands and manufacturers, it is this really complicated balance of how do they ensure that they don't have a stock out, right? Because being out of stock is pretty much every retailer or every brand's worst nightmare. We hear this on a day-to-day basis where our customers would rather be dramatically overstocked and lose money